And one thing that, what we're really seeing is like with young people having access to things like LLMs and things like that, extreme knowledge and competence coming earlier, like
Yeah.
really, really extreme. And it just makes me really excited. And sometimes people ask us, like, what do we want to be doing in 15 years? And I've been telling people, like, and I mean it, but like I sort of say it in a tongue in cheek way, is like, I want to be funding 11-year-olds because some of them are going to be ready and the world's not going to be ready, but I'm going to be ready.
Hello again and welcome. Today, I want you to meet Danielle Strachman. She was the founder and program director of the Thiel Fellowship, which, if you haven't heard of it, you're about to learn a lot about it. But I hope you've heard of it because it's an incredibly cool program that's changing the world. She's now the co-founder and general partner of 1517, which is a venture capital fund dedicated to backing technology startups founded by dropouts, renegade students, and sci-fi scientists that sort of emerged from her work with the Thiel Fellowship. In this episode, we do a deep dive into what makes a Thiel Fellow. I think it's one of the most interesting questions that doesn't seem to be asked that often. There's something special about this group, and the closer you follow them and the closer you follow the whole program, the more stunning this whole thing seems. So we poke around at it. We look for the traits that she looks for in outstanding builders and founders, even as high school kids or younger. We ask about the pattern she sees in Thiel Fellows that parents might use. She speaks really highly of Montessori, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that. We also talk about the most recent work in 1517, how that fund does due diligence, and what some of their portfolio looks like. It's very exciting to me as both a curious person and wanting to learn what makes these great founders great, how we can identify them early, how we can best support them, and an early look at some of the people who are changing the world. Danielle provides a lot of insight on startups, of course, and startup investing, of course, but also how to develop founders, bring them along, support them best, especially young founders, and to build these really rich networks. You'll hear a lot that might remind you of like scouting athletes early, and she and her partner Michael really like do that work to dig in and explore the world and find really fascinating mutants, as she calls them, early on. I really appreciated having this conversation with her, and I hope you enjoy joining us. As you know, I don't do outside sponsors for this podcast, but I will invite you to invest alongside me through Rolling Fund. Similar to Danielle, we make it our mission to provide capital to obsessive geniuses building utopian technologies. And if you want to support us in supporting them, please open your browser right now and type in rolling.fun, F-U-N. I'm honored that more than 100 listeners like you now invest alongside us in these early stage tech startups. Accredited investors can invest through AngelList today. And with the Rolling Fund, the sooner you invest, the more deals you get to participate in. In the past year, we've invested in companies like asteroid mining, autonomous cargo carrying airships by a team coming out of SpaceX. Most recently, the Tesla of bulldozers, which I'm very excited about. They are a very promising future construction conglomerate that I think is doing some really cool work. If you want to put your money to work alongside ours, click on rolling.fun, which is linked in the show notes below. If you want to learn more, chat about it with me, just reach out through Twitter or email. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and enjoy Smart Friends, your favorite podcast, arriving at your ears in 3, 2, 1. Well, for those who are new to it, and at least somebody will be because my mom listens to this podcast, would you please introduce the Thiel Fellowship? And I'm gonna caveat this introduction with like just absolutely brag on it, because I feel like some of the times I hear about it, I hear about this very like high level general version, and it does not really sell the impact that the Thiel Fellowship has had, which I think is unbelievable and still underrated, even by people who feel like they're familiar with like what it is and what it does.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thank you for having me here today, and very excited to share with people, especially who might not be familiar with the Thiel Fellowship. The Thiel Fellowship started 15 years ago. It was started by Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal, first investor in Facebook. And when he was investing in Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg was 19, 20 years old, like quite young. And in fact, the movie The Social Network was coming out in, I think it was September of 2010, right before the launching of the Thiel Fellowship. And Peter had this idea on a plane ride back from New York to San Francisco, and he'd been thinking about education for a long time. And this idea was hatched of, well, if instead of a young person going into debt of 100K to go to school, and let's not like well, we could get into the interest rates, but we don't have to here. What if you gave a young person $100,000 non-dilutive and said, hey, the world's your oyster. What are you going to do over the next 2 years with this support and funding? He launched that program. And it was when we launched the first batch of Thiel Fellows. Oh, I forgot to say the couple sort of, I don't even like calling them restrictions, but there are a couple of like, hey, here's what we're looking for. We're looking for people who are working on projects. And I use the word projects a lot because we weren't looking for specifically startup founders. People could be working on a startup. They could be working on research. They could be working on a nonprofit. And you couldn't be in school and you couldn't have a job somewhere else. So you needed to be full time on whatever your mission and vision was. And the idea was, hey, what happens when people take this left turn, when all of their peers are going to college and sort of doing the right thing, going into debt to do it, sort of getting on an escalator, if you will, and not getting off. This was very, very controversial. These
Oh yeah.
days, people talk about like the American gap year is now a thing, which is really
Mhm.
amazing. The American gap year did not exist 15 years ago. It was a very European thing to do to have a gap
I mean,
year.
you guys were like very attacked when this came out
Oh,
because this was
extremely.
so, yeah, not
Yeah,
just
we
like
were.
uncommon, but
Yeah.
like taboo.
Oh, yeah. This was extremely taboo to say that, hey, maybe young people might do something else other than go to college at the age of 18. In fact, Larry Summers called us the most misguided piece of philanthropy that ever existed, which is pretty amazing. And what's interesting to sort of like fast forward is we got to work with some young people who have become some like very well-renowned tech greats, which means they've had a profound impact, like not just on business, but also on humanity, on people's individuals' lives, on technology. Some of these
Mhm.
people are people like Vitalik Buterin with Ethereum. We worked with him before he launched Ethereum. In fact, my colleague Michael did a Facebook post telling everyone to buy into the pre-sale of Ether. One of the first media posts out there about it. We supported Dylan Field in launching Figma, which IPO'd a couple months ago. That IPO is 12 years in the making, and we worked with him when he had stopped out of Brown to work on
Mhm.
Figma. People like Laura Deming, who are doing incredible work in longevity. She also started a venture fund to back longevity companies, and now she's currently working on a longevity startup. So very excited to see what happens there. People like Ritesh Agarwal with Oyo Rooms, second largest hotel chain in the world.
Hmm.
Obviously extremely uncommon to be working outside North America through really any program that supported young people. So that was really amazing to get to support him. And what's interesting too to see, and those are direct outcomes of people working on the direct thing that they started in the Thiel Fellowship. But then there's these indirect outcomes also, which are really extraordinary. For example, Chris Ola came into the Thiel Fellowship as a young man who was super interested in 3D printing. He ended up wanting to research ML, what would become AI. And he has become one of the top researchers in the space. After the Thiel Fellowship, he went to Google Brain. And today, actually, he's one of the co-founders of Anthropic. And we
Mhm.
think that, being in people like Montessori have a lot to say about being in a highly saturated environment really matters to those long-term outcomes. So the thing that I used to always say about the fellowship was this is a 2-year program with a 10-year timeline. Like it's going to take us a long time to figure it out. And more recently, people are starting to see, wow, like, on the business financial side, if you think of the Thiel Fellowship like an accelerator, it has the best outcomes of really the top accelerators out there. So, people are
Yeah.
fighting about, is it better than YC? Is it on par? I don't really get into that whole thing because honestly, we were doing something totally different. We were picking people 19 and under. We were picking only 20 people. And so in my purview, yeah, when we have our own restrictions of not just looking for great people, but looking for very specific types working with young people, YC can take anybody they want. We were not, we were looking for something quite unique and different. So I think the outcomes are even more incredible given those creative constraints we had on our program.
Yeah. And so what is you said that it's a 2-year program with a 10-year outcome, over a 10-year outcome?
I used to
Um,
say, and I would say this to the Thiel Fellows, like working with them in the program, this is a 2-year program with a 10-year timeline.
10-year
Because
timeline.
sometimes people, I remember when we got to the end of the first 2-year batch, and this people like Laura Deming, Paul Gu, who started Upstart, Nick Camarata, all these folks. And people were like, "Oh, are we going to do like a demo day or this or that?" And I was not into that. I was like, "This is not about like we want to celebrate what's been done here, but really this is still the beginning. Like this is
Mhm.
still the beginning of a very long trajectory." And that intuition was dead on. Like I said, Dylan had his IPO just a couple months ago, and that was 12 years in the making, and that's on par for like an average
Yeah.
IPO as well.
Yeah. So
So yeah, it's interesting to have something that we've worked on go from being literally shamed, and not just the program. This was one of the things that shocked me the most, especially at the time, was people were publicly attacking individual Thiel fellows. It wasn't just, hey, the Thiel Foundation is doing this, rah rah, we don't like it, or Peter saying this. It was attacking people like Dale Stevens, like very publicly, people like Andrew Su, who's, a multiple time startup founder now, as 18 and 19-year-olds. And, what I want to say to those people now is shame on you. Like,
yeah.
kind of how dare you attack young people who want to make a really, really big difference? And now we can see have done that over time. So that was the most shocking thing of all. But now, it feels a little bit like this overnight success, 15 years in the making narrative, where
Yeah.
people are kind of waking up and seeing, hey, wow, this program has an outsized impact. And not just like comparing it to YC and things like that, but also culturally changing the narrative. The term higher education bubble was not coined by Peter, but he popularized it. And I remember in one of our reports that after the first year, I was like kind of trying to look for any data of like, yes, I keep saying this is a 2-year program with a 10-year timeline, but I also want to try to start showing what's actually happening. And I looked at what are the Google searches for higher ed bubble. And it was interesting. I don't remember the exact number, but it like
Mm.
skyrocketed. It went from being like a flat Google search term to really, really sharp, really quickly. And what I noticed over time too is that eventually that term got unbundled from Peter, means it's getting into the common vernacular. So people were just like, oh yeah, higher ed bubble, and not like, oh, Peter Thiel's talking about this thing. And then seeing it just normalized in families and people writing into us, hey, my mom told me about this program. In fact, we just got an email through our 1517 contact form, and we always ask, like, how'd you hear about us? And this teenager wrote in and said, oh, my mom told me to come check this out. And I'm like, yeah, like that's
Yeah.
amazing. And we're also seeing this on the college level too, actually. We have a teen camp we run, and one of our
Mm.
teen campers is doing a gap year right now. And the school that he applied and got into and may or may not go to, he's doing a deferral. He's doing gap year this year to actually work at a tech startup in San Francisco. We helped him negotiate, and think about, hey, how do you think about that process? Really fun to do that. And on his apparently, like, his college now has a box for like, are you going to take a gap year? And
Mm.
it's interesting to see that it's so common now that schools have to prep for it. I'm still very confused about why 4-year institutions have not changed their ways and been like, maybe we should speed things up. Maybe this should be a 2-year degree, or maybe we should offer some sort of like, unbundled, hey, you want freshman year and that's all you want experience or something like that. But at least we've gotten to the point where they put a checkbox on there. It reminds me a lot of, I've worked in education and alternative education for a long time. And I also worked in neurology at one point in my career. And the thing that always kind of astounded me was that I'd be reading interesting papers about learning and cognition on the neurology side. And it took about 10 years for those things to actually like downstream go into the classroom. And I feel like it's kind of the same with these things. Like it takes a lot of time for these
Yeah.
systems to change. People talk about systems like a boat. It's like the larger the boat, the harder it is to turn it. But I'm still surprised that it's like, okay, we got the checkbox for taking a gap year, but we haven't gotten the actual systemic on the college side change. But families and young people are making those changes themselves.
Yeah, I mean, so many of those institutions don't change until they're forced to, or they follow
Mhm.
the physics rule of like physics advances one death at a time,
Oh my
even
gosh.
more
Wow.
slowly. Like people don't update. People don't change their mind; they just get replaced eventually. It's very few people that can like update in a dynamic environment, especially I think in something in a slow moving institution like a school. And part of the I think the magic of what Peter and you and Michael identified 15 years ago is like there were hints at it, and you've just like the theory reading the Michael's book Paper Belt on Fire is like all of the trends that you identified in terms of like higher education getting more expensive, the outcomes getting worse, it being suitable for fewer people, they're not innovating, they're not updating. All of those have gotten worse, massively worse over the intervening decade. And so the things like the Thiel Fellowship and others that it sort of inspired just become more and more and more popular as they should be.
Well, and what's interesting to me is I'm really big on fellowship programs in general now. And when we were running the Thiel Fellowship, there weren't other fellowships for young people. They just didn't exist. There were fellowships, they were usually for postdocs, but you didn't get something early in your sort of career or early in your adult life. And now it's so amazing to see things like OSV and 776 and the magnificent grants and all this. And I'm like a resource librarian. I keep a spreadsheet of all these different grants. I'm sending it out to people all the time. And we actually do an event now called the Renaissance Reimagined, because I really believe where a lot of this early R&D and creative thinking and, like stuff that has a lot of friction because of views or, not, this sounds terrible. Not enough people have died in physics yet, or, whatever it may be. I think those are the places that are gonna really support some of these new changes. So we gather those leaders together every 2 years, and then we also do, like, this cross-pollination of fellowship communities, and it's been really fun, but it's really cool to see that grow because it went from we were the only game in town, which made me sad. I was like, "Man, I want more resources out there for young people,"
Oh
and now
yeah.
that resources are here.
I mean, it must have been heartbreak to choose 20 people out of
Yeah.
whatever, how
Oh,
many
absolutely.
thousands or tens of
Yeah,
thousands
yeah.
that you met of worthy applicants that you're
Yeah.
just like, oh,
Absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of times, like, my sort of no responses, especially at the finalist round, where we just have so many spots. Like, this is kinda where we're at. What was interesting is we would keep in touch with the applicant pool. We had applicant events, and we do this with 15, 17 too. Community building is something that scales.
mm,
Because can we write a check to everybody? No. But can they come to an event and meet potential collaborators and mentors and peers who really get it? Absolutely. And it's been interesting to see as well, you know, young people engaging on that level and wanting and needing that. And what we see in today's age, which is interesting since COVID, is what we hear is I don't get to meet what we used to hear in the past was I don't get to meet other young people like me. And what we hear
mm,
now is I don't get to meet other young people like me in person.
mm.
There's so much that's been brought online. And for these institutions, it's cheaper for them to run it this way and less liability and, less everything, less, dynamicness. But we do a lot of that for our community, not just our founders.
I'm curious. This is going way back to like the seeds of this thing, but what does it look like when Peter Thiel starts something? You said Peter Thiel started it, but I have the sense that like it was actually mostly like him setting the starting conditions or being the
Yeah,
public face or having the germ
for
of the
sure.
idea. Like, what does
Yeah,
those
yeah,
early formation
yeah,
stages of the Teal Fellowship look
yeah.
like?
Yeah, it was really exciting because I had worked with homeschoolers before the fellowship, and I also started a charter school in San Diego called Innovations Academy, still running today, 17 years running,
Mm,
and we serve 450 students a year. When you run and operate a charter school and you start a charter school, there's all this operations work you have to do to get it off the ground, and we had to write a 400-page thesis basically and petition the district, and you have to do pilots and like all this stuff. So this is the mindset that I'm in of like how you build something. And I had seen Peter's interview with Sarah Lacey at TechCrunch Disrupt about the fellowship. And every now and again, I go back and watch it actually, because it's just fascinating because he's talking about the fellowship in the present tense. the application is up. We have this, we have mentors. And when I watched that, my assumption was like, oh, well, they must be operators and they must have all the things that they need because that's the way that I would do it. And less than 24 hours later, I got a phone call from this woman, Lindy Fishburne, and her exact words to me were, Danielle, the foundation has lost their minds. We're starting our first in-house program and we have nobody running it. And I was like, what? Like, how does that work? Like, that was unbelievable to me that you'd be this like that you could just do that as a big public figure. And I loved it. I loved that it was just like, wow, this is like nimble and creative and they're just going for it.
We build the front door of the house and then build the rest of the house as people walk up to the front door.
That's a great description. That is a great description. And so I interviewed the next week to come on board. And then the week after that, I did come on board. And a lot of it too, we were building with the Thiel Fellows of like, hey, what does a retreat for this type of person look like? What do they want in terms of community building? We didn't know that. So like almost all of them moved to the Bay Area when they got the fellowship, but we didn't have a requirement about like being in the Bay or doing reviews in person. Like, we would have events that people could fly in for, but there was not a requirement on location. And then all of them came to the area. Some of them were just getting an apartment wherever they could. I remember a couple of them got apartments in the Tenderloin, and I was like, oh my God, like that's a bad neighborhood. Like we got to get you somewhere else. And then in subsequent years, we actually partnered with people to do like co-living houses for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would finance it for the summer. We would typically take a batch like at the beginning of the summer, have them live in this house together for those who wanted to. We're very sort of choice-based in how we do things. And oftentimes they would take over the lease. And actually there's a house called Mission Control that has like gone in and out and through the Thiel Fellowship and Thiel Fellowship friend adjacent communities. And right now it's kind of back to being like a maker sort of startup house, which is really cool. And I'm in touch with the person who's leading it now. And it's cool to see that house has been like in the family for probably like 13 years at this point, which is really, really cool. And so, yeah, for me, it was really amazing to come in. And what I didn't want was someone to tell me like, well, here's what it's going to be. Here's the dream. Here's everything we want. We just want you to manage it. I was like, I build things. Like I want to embed homeschooling philosophy into this. I want to embed like unconference vibes in the events we do. Like I have a whole thing I want to do. And what was great was there was that pure openness to do that. And what there wasn't, that a lot of organizations do, there wasn't a lot of like, hey, we have to prove that this is working within the first year, even within the second year. Like I said, I was like writing up these reports. I wasn't even really being asked to write these reports. I was just like, I just feel like I should be documenting some things. Like this seems like a good thing to do. In fact, I should go back and find some of those. Be like, wow, what did I put in those reports? Like, I remember looking for that search term, higher ed bubble, and seeing what happens there. But now I've got an itch to scratch. I'm like, let me go back and see what was I putting in those reports. But that freedom was really, really important on our team to be able to be nimble and choose to do things how and when we would do them and iterate on the program, iterate on the application. Yeah, it was great.
So speaking of the application, I feel like so deeply curious, and I'm sure this is hours of conversation and years of intuition, but what makes a Thiel Fellow? Like, I feel like that was one of my favorite chapters of Michael's book. Like, what are the traits? What are the patterns that you see? I think it's something that you are an absolute world expert in, is like seeing these unbelievable people at their earliest sort of stages and pattern recognizing and nurturing them and bringing them along. So if we could like a deep dive on that a little bit, I think that'd be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that comes to mind now, like one thing that's been beautiful about the book is we're getting some of our lexicon out into the broader ecosystem. And I'll talk about some of those things, but we also have new lexicon where it's like, okay, we've got some new phrases, new things, and we're always thinking about this. We're always jamming on certain ideas. Like one new lexicon piece is dog on a leash energy. This is not in the book. This has come up in the last year and a half, something like that. And it's this like energetic sense you have of someone that they're a dog on a leash, and a dog who's like pulling on a leash doesn't need more food put down in front of it, doesn't need more water, doesn't need a longer leash. What they need is to be cut. So
Yeah.
like that is our job both at, 15, 17, and in the past with the Thiel Fellowship of like, we're here to cut the leash for you. Like we're here to set you free and see what you can do with all that energy that you're pushing with. And I think it's something too that's coming to mind around, a dog who's pulling on a leash is not compliant. You know,
Mhm.
they're, they're maybe they're not fully untrainable, but it's like, okay, like they're not going to bow down to the system. And I feel like a lot of the people we work with are the same, where they've kind of seen, they've sort of either looked at systems sometimes from the interior, but sometimes from the exterior and seen like, okay, it's barren in there. That's not where I want to be. And so are like, you know, making a pretty different choice for themselves. So another word that comes to mind a lot for us these days is mutant. Like these people
Mm.
are kind of mutants. Like they don't fit in your typical system. They have weird outside hobbies. You ask them about their childhood and you get, again, weird stories, a lot of stuff around almost blowing up the house level things. And then a couple that are in the book. One is a trait that we've just loved and loved and loved. And in fact, I took a group of high schoolers to the Gundo to get the inside scoop on a bunch of startups there. And so many of the founders, it's funny, I didn't prep them on this at all. I wasn't like, hey, we want these messages for these high schoolers, like, but they gave some great messages. And a lot of the places we went to, it's very heavy engineering focused. One group, Vukasan, who's making a new 3D metal printer, Augustus from Rainmaker. He actually had one of his employees, his hire number 4, give us a tour because he's like halfway across the world somewhere right now doing
Yeah.
stuff. But what people were talking about multiple times at our tour were it's not enough to be a geek. You have to be a geek who can articulate really well to anybody, where you can talk to your grandma at Thanksgiving about what you do, where you can talk to anybody and you can geek out with the geekiest geek. And we call this hyperfluency at 15, 17. And we
Mhm.
didn't coin this term when we were at the foundation. It really took, Michael, when he was writing that book, it was only maybe a year or two before that we sat down and we were like, we need to write our own lexicon. And so we were intuiting these things. We were getting pattern recognition for these things, but we hadn't named them. And there's nothing like listening to someone who's super passionate about what they do and they can explain it to you. And you're like,
Mhm.
hold on, time out, back the bus up. Like, let's talk more about your ideas in physics. But yeah, talk to us like we are dumb Labrador retrievers. Like, let's, and not in a condescending way, not, can actually relate. There's that social emotional intelligence piece of just
Mhm.
being able to explain things to people. So that's a trait that we have found to be very important. And the Thiel Fellows we worked with had that trait in spades where they could really, really explain and articulate in a beautiful way. And part of it might be some of our own bias of like, I used to be a teacher. Michael was gearing up to teach as well. And so we definitely have a bias towards people who can teach and explain things. And there seems to be something to that. Lastly, I'll say another trait that became very clear pretty early on in the fellowship days, like probably, I mean, when I say early on, I mean in like year 3, was the people we work with are insatiably curious and
Mhm.
not just about their area. They're just like inherently curious people. They're people who have somehow been able to keep that inner 5-year-old of asking why and being curious. And I remember when we first were getting to know Vitalik Buterin, I was like really blown away. I was like, wow, this guy, he's not just curious. And I used to work in intelligence and cognitive testing and stuff. So I like have more of a grip on what does it look like to be a standard deviation or 2 or 3 out on something in the visceral sense of like, I'm working with someone, this person looks like they have like an IQ of 130. This is what that's like and not just a number. What we used to say about Vitalik was that he is, definitely at least 2 standard deviations out on curiosity, which actually puts you pretty far out on the edge of the bell curve. And, I would think of my own experiences previous to knowing Vitalik and think about, cousins I have who are 20 years younger than me. And I was like, they're curious, but they're not like this. Like this is a mutant. This is a whole other beast. And when we got to know people like that and see it, then you can spot it in other people because you actually have like a comparison. If you think about like color, you're like, okay, this color red is saturated in this way, and this other color red is saturated in this way. But you've got to spend time with both of those reds to get it. And you can't just theorize about like, well, this red is going to be deeper in this way. Like, I think there's something about the visceral experience of it that has really mattered over time.
Yeah, well, and you have this really interesting experience of like, I like the quote, you can only conceive of the level of excellence you've experienced. And so, like, as you are sort of iteratively marching through like the top 1% and the 10th of a percent, 100th of a percent, 1000th of a percent of like the most talented teenagers in the country, if not the world, like you do start to see that thing of like, wow, like our bar just keeps moving. It's so much
Oh,
higher than you ever
and,
thought it could be.
and I think the best is yet to come.
Yeah.
Like, with the fellowship as like 2-year program, 10-year timeline, I feel like that same way 15 years in, where
Mhm.
I'm like, I love everybody we've worked with. Thiel Fellows, 15, 17ers have done some incredible things. And like the best is definitely yet to come because younger and younger people are working on harder and harder problems and getting to the frontier of knowledge. And I get to see this every day. And I'm
Yeah.
getting to see what it looks like for them to be like in there working on it right now. And I'm super curious, like, what will those outcomes be in like 7 years from now?
Well,
And
and
like then other people will be like, wow, holy moly, this person has a decacorn and they're doing crazy, amazing things and they're only 25. How does that happen? It'll be like, oh, well, those seeds were planted when they were 13, 15, 16 years old. And that's when we got to know them.
And there's so many trends driving that actually. Like if you think like the level of interconnectivity of the world is still going up. The greatest generation of founders are accomplishing more younger, which enables the next generation to dream bigger at a younger level. We're reaching more people on Earth. The Thiel Fellowship itself is like becoming known to more and more people, and there are more of them, which means there's more sort of signposts towards it. Like, I find it interesting in tech generally, like how often we are only a few percent into something that might be around for 100 years. Like, you don't get to assume that it will be, but like, what if YC is going to be 20 years or 200 years? What if 15, 17 Thiel Fellowship are going to be hundreds of years long programs? Like, what does that look like in another century is a really wild thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing that, what we're really seeing is like with young people having access to things like LLMs and things like that, extreme knowledge and competence coming earlier, like
Yeah.
really, really extreme. And it just makes me really excited. And sometimes people ask us, like, what do we want to be doing in 15 years? And I've been telling people, like, and I mean it, but like I sort of say it in a tongue in cheek way is like, I want to be funding 11-year-olds,
Yeah.
like, because some of them are going to be ready and the world's not going to be ready, but I'm going to be ready.
I mean, the history of genius is often that it's happens really young. Like,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
old Beethoven story about like
Yeah.
writing symphonies at 11.
Oh, I know. Right. Yeah.
I'm sure you tell that story all the time, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's a narrative violation to the like all people are equal if given equal opportunities. But like I think this is Peter's superpower, right? Is like seeing the world for what it is and aligning with it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's funny, I even, speaking of the like, hey, some people are geniuses thing, like my own contrarian take on this is that like all children before the age of 5 like are geniuses. Like I've never talked to a 5-year-old that I've thought like, oh man, not very much horsepower
Mm.
there. Like, and I really think it's a lot of our systems that squash people. And I do think that there are individual differences as well, but I think those systems squash people way, way more than people recognize. And it's detrimental to these people's futures. And just like, it's just so painful, like to
This is
think about it.
a perfect segue because I had my first child like
Mm.
2 months ago, and
Oh,
so I am
congratulations.
already having an existential crisis about
Yeah.
like the education system and what the things are. And so like, I know you can't reverse engineer a Thiel Fellowship, but you've seen so many unique people and so many interesting things, and
Yep.
you have a background in homeschooling
Yep.
and educational system. So like, what do you
Yeah.
think is the sort of essential ingredients of an upbringing of an
Sure.
education that
Yeah.
doesn't squash
Yeah.
the genius out of the 5-year-old?
Absolutely. I think a lot starts at home. I think a lot starts, with having parents who are connected and attuned and who are curious, who bring that curiosity out of their children, who don't squash the curiosity in their children when their children are being curious, who can take the lens of being child-led. I'll never forget, in my early 20s, I was like nannying and tutoring, and I took this little girl, Jenna, who I still know. She's in her 20s now, like probably mid 20s. I'm like, whoa, time is flying. But I took her on a walk in her neighborhood and I like let her direct the walk. And I remember like we ended up sitting at this set of steps and there were like stones embedded in the steps. And we just sat there for like a half hour and she's like touching them and looking at them and just was intrigued. And it was like, yeah, like let's do what she wants to do right now, not what I think or like, and we weren't doing baby Mozart or flashcards or like anything like that. It was like, let's just keep following her interest. So I think a lot starts in the home, including things like, have you set up the environment so that the child can have agency in the home? If the child is old enough to be able to like pour their own water into a cup, is there a water container low enough so they can do it themselves and they don't have to ask? Are books on a shelf that they can reach? And is the environment set up? And a lot of this also goes into Montessori theory. I read Montessori 25 years ago and I've been doing a reread. And it's amazing. She has just the deepest reverence for the human experience. And she's really channeled and funneled that into children because I think children are kind of like the purest expression of being human because they haven't necessarily touched all these systems that kind of squash everything. And so a lot of people get into like, oh, well, you got to buy these blocks and you've got to have a thing to sweep with. And it's like not about that. Like what it's about is like that respect and that reverence and thinking about, is this environment set up for this child to be doing exploration, for them to have access to real materials, for them not to always have to ask for things. All of these things are great. And then I just have to throw in a plug for reading. Reading to children is amazing. Like it is one of the most well-researched outcome-based things you can do is read to your child very, very early. And children pick up language so seamlessly. They're such little sponges. So I also tell people, don't dumb down your language for children. Use
Mhm.
your language. And children always ask, hey, what's that? What does that word mean? Oh, okay. And I do this with my godchildren all the time. Of like, in fact, sometimes I try to like go higher with my vocabulary because I'm like, I'm always like, teachable moment. They're gonna ask me what this word means. This came up the other day, and now I'm like, oh, what was that word? I don't even remember. But yeah, all these things I think like add up. And lastly, I'll say we did pull Thiel Fellows early on because the
Mm.
educator in me was like, I gotta know what school was like for these people. I'd say, like, certainly a majority of fellows had spent some amount of time in what would be considered alternative education. That might be Montessori, that might be being homeschooled. And sometimes it would just be for like a 6-month period or a year, but they had had a taste of something different. And, the N on that study, if you will, that observational study was low. I think we did it in the first like 3 batches of fellows. So probably something like 60 people. But it was really interesting. Lots of Montessori, lots of homeschooling. And some people, would argue that like, well, you look at those populations, you get 2-parent households who are like, more engaged and things like that. Can't deny it. I think that, a lot does start in the home, but that says I don't think, I grew up in a single parent household. My mom is very curious and inquisitive and ran a wood shop in the basement. We were always building and making stuff. And so she was like, all right, I'm going to do this the way I know how to do it. And, got to grow up in that environment. So I think these things can be implemented and it doesn't have to be like, home life has to look perfect all the time.
Yeah. When you say reading Montessori, do you mean reading like the works of
Oh,
Maria
the
Montessori
works of
herself?
Montessori. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
absorbent mind is incredible. That's,
Okay.
where, that's where I tell people to start. What's crazy to me is this reread period. When I first read her, what I picked up on was this reverence, this very deep reverence that she has for children and therefore the human experience. But when I've been doing a reread, there's like all of these like undercurrents about higher ed in there, and some of them are overcurrents. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I wonder how much I was like memed out by
Yeah.
Montessori. and had no idea, and that would like influence later how I thought about things. So it's been really funny to go back and be like, whoa, themes are popping out that I didn't even recognize in this book the first time, because I was focused on child development and, like K through 12 and like things like that.
Yeah. It's the Steve Jobs, like, trust your intuition, it already knows what you wanna become. Like,
Yeah.
um,
No,
w
definitely.
w one
I
of
want to add one more thing while we're talking about like
please, yeah.
thing stuff. The last thing I'll add, and I say this as like my godchildren live next door to me. I get to be auntie. I'm not a full-time parent. So, this one's a tough one, but I'm really mindful about my screen time in front of my
Mm,
godchildren.
mm,
I'm like very mindful of like that phone is going to stay in my pocket. What I don't want is them picking up on that this cube is like the most interesting thing in the room right now. And someone on Twitter said something that I think is absolutely brilliant. They said, big screens good, small screens bad. And I've had this in my mind now for months. And in fact, we just had a larger camp for 1517 called 1517 Unplugged. And we got a huge screen and speakers, and we showed Ratatouille and Ghostbusters. And it was so fun to watch these movies, like really big outside with people, and then like have discussions and talk about it. And it would sort of permeate throughout. And this whole like big screen's good because you're like interacting and you can walk away from it, and small screen's bad. I think there's really something to this.
that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a big screen is sort of the bigger it is, the more social of an experience it is.
Right.
There's a
When you're
room
not
watching a TV.
holding it and your
Yeah.
body's not like encompassing it. And, I see this with my godchildren. They've got a big TV in the playroom, but they're like building blocks on the floor and doing something else while they're also doing it. And it's interesting to see.
I thought there's this since the front-facing camera and Face ID, it's actually become like a competes for your attention in a way that it didn't when it was a device. Like, it will not unlock without eye contact. And once you're looking at it, you're like dialed into it and the dopamine loop is going, and like it just interrupts the social pattern in such an interesting, pernicious way. And if you're, sitting there next to a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, like, they don't understand what's happening. They just know that you're not paying attention to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a study that just came out. I haven't dug into the actual study, so it'd be interesting to see like how did they screen for this. But it turns out, and this makes so much sense to me, like having a phone in your pocket or on the table, part of your like attentional power is still on like what's going on with that device. And they're finding like, I mean, like if you put it in a different room, it makes a cognitive difference to how you do
Mhm.
things. And so even things, I mean, I think about this. We had a dinner with founders recently and nobody put their phones on the table. But if they did, I was going to be like, everyone needs to put their phone at least in your pocket. Like, we're not having phones at the table during family dinner with 1517. Like, we're not doing
Yeah.
it. Because they're habits, right? And habits die really, really hard. But if you start doing it, you got to start a habit like that day. And I think these
Yeah.
things are just super important, especially around children.
Yeah. Is there anything that you are like recommending to families specifically that or like you direct for your godchildren or wish for your godchildren? Those that are your
Right.
sort of closest to?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of it to me is about quality time. It can be
Mm.
about having a really good conversation. It can be about building something together, playing a game. One of my favorite memories with my oldest godchild is I think I don't know if she was 3 or 4, somewhere in there. We started playing tic-tac-toe together, and I got to be the first person to show her what tic-tac-toe was. And what was amazing to me, especially as an educator, was to see her like her cognitive jumps on
Mm.
tic-tac-toe. And there were some times where she'd be like, "Boop, I beat you." And I was like, "Oh my God, you did." Like, holy moly, that's incredible. And I was not anticipating that. But yeah, just like really, really amazing to see that. And just, yeah, like engaging with them on what their interests are, and what
Yeah.
I'm actually really excited about is to integrate this in more. Like, the family has been talking to the oldest that probably when she's about 10, she'll be able to homeschool. And I'm
Mm.
like, cool. She can come with me to meetings. She can,
Yeah.
and like already I have founders over my house all the time. She's always asking them questions about science. Like, I love getting that going. And actually it's been funny. We've had some of our like I'll do a barbecue with our community members and people will come over and like will vie for the children's attention. They'll be like, "Oh, she seems most interested in this person and I want to talk to her about rockets and she's super into space. I really want to talk to her." I'm like, "You'll have your chance to talk to Sorka. It's cool. It's gonna happen. We're gonna make sure you guys get to talk about rockets." And it's wonderful. So I think that like one of the things I'm able to sort of bring to the table for them is this like highly saturated environment and community and like
Hmm.
bringing people around them who are working on crazy things. And this is why I did the field trip day with the Hawthorne El Segundo high schoolers was like, I want them to see the inside of these companies. One company was 2 people. Another one was probably, I don't know, 25, something like that, and they were busting at the seams. And it's just like, "Oh my gosh, like, people are packed in here doing their thing. The energy is really infectious," and I want them to see, like, that that's something you can do. You know, if you're someone who's in engineering, you know, in Southern California, you don't have to just go necessarily work in defense or at one of the primes, like, you can do something else.
Yeah. One of the traits that was sort of listed in this book, I think there were like 8 or 10, was emotional depth and resilience, which is a really interesting one for a, 17, 18, 20-year old to have. And I'm curious what the markers of that are, but also where does it come from at that age? Do you see like how often are you meeting parents? Where do you see patterns there?
Interesting. A lot of this, I think, comes out in their storytelling the most of like I had a call with a younger founder recently, and she really opened the kimono. Like her and I had never talked before. And she told me about a lot of experiences in her life that were just hard,
Hmm.
really, really challenging. But the thing that really came through was that, like, she's doing her thing, not in the, like, I have a chip on my shoulder and I'm gonna prove other people wrong because these bad things have happened, but more in the, like, and I kept hope this whole time, and I know that I'm aligning myself in this positive path, and that's why I have to do what I'm doing, so that other people don't have to experience things like I did. And it's like, wow. Like, that is heartbreaking on one end, and also shows that resiliency of like, wow, this person being able to keep a positive, forward-thinking, I can do something about this attitude in the face of just absolute trauma. I mean, I was just blown away, and I felt so honored talking to her, and that she would also share these things with me. And so, yeah, I think, you know, we have become very trusted mentors and advisors to people. And I've always been this way where like random person behind me in the supermarket is like, "Let me tell you my deepest, darkest thing." And I'm like, "Why is this happening?" like I'm actually I'm really good with people's secrets. I very much pride myself with like putting those secrets in like an internal apothecary cabinet and just being like, okay, I'm gonna keep this close for you. And somehow people pick up on that. So yeah, I don't know why people tell me these things, but they do, you know, and you know, when I think about, you know, the NVIDIA story, Jensen tells these incredible stories of hardship. And he just went to Stanford and gave this great talk about like you all haven't suffered enough.
Yeah.
Like you haven't and like every time I hear him talk, I'm like, I love you. Like you're amazing. And I think those messages are really, really important. You know, so we've seen some of those things come out. Now sometimes it's not in the like super traumatic, like wow, holy moly, obviously do not wish this on people category. But sometimes it's also resilience and like people told me it wasn't possible to do X in physics. And I just kept going and going and going and going. And there was that like 2 standard deviations out on curiosity and this super drive of like, I am going to bring this to fruition. And I think about someone like Austin Russell with Luminar, and he just, I mean, even in the fellowship, he had fellows who were like, "There, this isn't possible. It's not possible to build what he's talking about. There's no way it's going to happen." Like, he's just like, whatever. I'm just going to like, you can say what you want. I'm just going to keep doing it. And I don't think it was like arrogance, like, oh, it's going to work. I
Mm.
think it was more like, I'm going to find out. And I think that drive to find out also has that resiliency piece, because most people, that finding out process leads you to lots of failure. Well, it didn't work this time. It didn't work the next time. Didn't work the time after that. But, oh, okay, maybe the 12th time it worked. And, there's like the whole Edison light bulb, however many, I don't remember the exact number, but it's like, okay, I think it was, I don't know if it's in like the hundreds category or what or more, but it was like, it took that many iterations to
Yeah.
do it. And
I
that's
think it's
resilience too.
yeah, almost 1,000. And James Dyson's story is,
Okay, that's what
5,000
I thought. I thought
some
it was 1,000. I
prototypes.
was like, that
Yeah.
sounds ridiculous to say, but it's like, as ridiculous as it is to say, that's it.
Well, it's an interesting, like, it's almost like the Stockdale paradox of like, I'm not attached to any one of these ideas or theories working, but I am going to keep trying different theories until
Mm,
I die
yeah.
because, like, this quest is worth it.
Well, and going back to kind of what we were talking about, child development, what dawns on me too is like, I think for a lot of these people, this is a playful process.
Hmm.
This isn't necessarily, maybe, and especially maybe not so at the beginning. I don't think it feels like work. I don't think it feels like a chore. I
Yeah.
think it probably feels like play to them, and they're tapped into that. And when a child is like deep in play, they just keep playing.
Yeah.
Like maybe there's a roadblock or something that stops them, but they just keep going. And so I think part of that is at play here is like, okay, these inventor types who are just like really hungry to satiate this itch. I think it's really playful.
Does that get to this is another sustaining motivation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the sustaining motivation is a huge trait that we look for. And usually this goes back into narrative and story, and sometimes it's this like, I've had this itch to scratch forever
Hmm.
or something like that. And sometimes it's very personal. We have a founder who has an autoimmune disease, and he is working on a cure for type 2 diabetes. And then he's looking to like purpose that platform, to cure other disease. And it comes from a really deep personal place for him. And part of that deep personal place, he gave a great talk at our event we just had, is he's like, I am really viscerally in touch that I only have at least this one visceral life.
Hmm.
And he's a spiritual person. So he may be like, all right, the kingdom of heaven is waiting for me, and I'm good for that too. But he also knows like this visceral piece of it, like this is this chapter. And he's very he has almost died multiple times. He had sepsis at one point while we worked with him, and I was just like, "Oh my god, like if we lose this guy, like, one, losing him is it's going to kill me, but losing his contribution to the world is going to harm other people." And it's just like heart-wrenching to think about. And he keeps that feeling close to him, and it keeps him going of like, well, I'm doing this because this is my shot. And he's going to make as big a shot as possible. And someone asked him, he runs a company called Stark Therapeutics. Someone asked, like, oh, well, what do you do when you're not feeling motivated? And he's like, I am not the guy to ask this. He's like, because he's like, I may be insane, but I just don't have that experience. Like, I'm just
Mhm.
so laser focus. I'm not like, oh, I'd rather be doing something else. This is the only thing he wants to do.
Yeah. This one's going to require a little definition. I don't know if what you're describing is this or not. The alpha gamma tensive brilliance. That's some of your high level grammar that I need. I
That's
talk to me
hilarious.
like I'm a
That
dog.
one I haven't used in a long time. I'm like, what was Michael getting at that one? What I can talk about that might be related, and I'm gonna have to be like, oh, Michael, I gotta go
my,
back and read your chapter, like, because we
my
we haven't used
recollection
that
my
expression.
recollection of it is because I've read this like within the last couple weeks is that they are just like two surprisingly contrasting traits, like the tensive brilliance of like somebody who's like really emotional and really technical or something like that, but I could be oversimplifying to its detriment.
So, okay, there's something else that was coming to mind when you were saying that might serve as a good example. So one of the things, and I don't remember if Michael coined this in the book, that I think touches on this is a trait we call crazy, crazy awesome, which is
Mm,
like we can't tell if the person is crazy or crazy awesome when we meet them or when we make the investment. I think people think like, oh, you must have figured out that they're crazy awesome and then you wrote them the check. We're like, No, the jury's out. It's going to take literal years to figure out if they're crazy or crazy awesome in this like particular domain. And what we've noticed is that trait tends to translate other places. So we were talking with someone who's working. I'll keep it high level. He's working on a quantum physics play in something. And at the beginning, this is crazy to me. So our team is on a Zoom call with this guy, and he's clearly in a hotel room, and his cats are in the hotel room. And I was like, wow, your cats are in the hotel room. Cool. Like, and we love rabbit holes at 15, 17. We're like, anything that's distracting or weird, we're going to ask you about it. And I was like, wow, wait, are you traveling with your cats? And he's like, yeah, I have these two cats. I travel with them. And we were like, okay, wow, that's already weird. Like he's starting to hit the crazy, crazy awesome meter just on that. And then he starts talking to us about how he believes some of these like quantum theories about how like animals can tell when you're going to come home, even though it's at a totally different
Mm.
time, because you've shared some atom or neutron or electron, and that's
You're
how they
entangled with your
they're
pets. Yeah.
entangled with you. Yeah. And I was
Yeah.
like, I love this guy. I was like, the fact that he's willing to share this with us. So that's that sort of like openness that we look
Mhm.
for, and that it's clear he really believes this, and he might be right, and he's also doing all this work in quantum. I was like, all right, this guy is hitting our crazy, crazy awesome vibe like a million times, and we love that. And sometimes what's interesting is that people end up being like crazy awesome in one area, and then their views on something else were just like, wow, they're batshit crazy. But we find that polarization to be a good thing,
Mhm.
where it's like, okay, if someone has really radical views in one area, are they just going to compartmentalize it to that? Probably not. And this is also why these people get rejected from systems, and also just like why they leave these systems is they're like, oh, it wasn't okay for me to talk about X, Y, or Z in my class or in my grad program. Even though I have these really brilliant ideas in this area, I can't question the authorities about this other thing over here. So I'm just viewed as crazy now.
This is really it's kind of an interesting question of like which comes first, the student rejecting the institution or the institution rejecting the
It's
student.
a great question. Yeah, it's a great question.
I'm sure you've got examples of both.
It
There's
goes
people
both
that
ways.
like don't drop out until they get the fellowship, and some that
Sure.
like would never have gone to college under any circumstances, regardless.
Right. No, totally. Like I think
Yeah.
about Josie Zahner with the Embryo Corporation. She went all the way through her PhD and was like, yo, homies, like
Yeah.
this institution is like not the best for all these reasons. And
Well,
now
and
she's doing really radical work. But she went all the way through.
and if you've talked to Josie at all or followed her even, you know that like it's pretty surprising that she made it that far. Because
I
like
concur. I know. I need to talk to her more about like how was that? What was the pain and suffering like? Like what? How much did you feel like you had to swallow yourself? Because like in my view, at like outside of like at the top level being a soul, like I think Josie is such
Mhm.
an amazing soul. I think Josie is an artist and a provocateur. And it happens to be that the medium she's using right now is biology, and I'm like, wow, how did you fit yourself in some of these boxes? Like, you and
Yeah.
master contortionist while also being self-expressed. I don't know exactly how that worked or works, for her because she also is butting up against the establishment and is working to also be taken seriously in
Yeah.
some sense by it because she's not an army of one. She has a team. Some of those people have also come all the way through the institution. Some of those people probably even thought they liked it, and now they're working in a crazy lab in Austin.
Yeah. Josie's one of a few. Like, it's funny how the sort of like minds attract in the like Silicon Valley world through this like purely organic thing. And so like just looking through the portfolio, I was like, invested in more Thiel Fellows than I thought, or more people in the 1517 orbit than I thought. And then like, of course, it makes total sense philosophically that like, we end up in such a similar place and look for similar things in founders. And Josie is one, Marathon Fusion is the other one that like came
Oh,
up
of
very
course.
quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My
Yeah. Where
God,
you're
love
like,
Kyle and Adam. And they have crazy stories. Like
yeah.
Like, Adam has this crazy story of hiking a mountain and, like, you're not supposed to go past a certain point at night because you're gonna get trapped up there, basically, and he, like, did and, like, ended up with this crazy, crazy excursion. I'm like, "Okay, I'm glad you didn't die." Like, that's
Yes.
good. And on all accounts, from the outside, he looks like a very mild-mannered, like, maybe not straight-laced, but mild-mannered, like, "Okay, no, I do my
Yeah.
physics, like, I do my thing," and then you get into these stories and you're like, "Oh my god, this guy's willing to do some risky, risky stuff, like, wild."
Yeah, and that's a good example of the thing you mentioned before, which is like just high variance. Like I don't have the ability to diligence whether your theoretical fusion engineering project is going to work. And like a lot of investors I talk to, are like I pass because I can't diligence it. I was like, the diligence, this thing has never been built before. The diligence is the company. Like
No,
you
I know.
just,
And that's what we talk about too, is like for us, like one, when someone hits our crazy, crazy awesome vibe, we're like, that's a great starter, number one. And two, we will have people speak to people in the area who
yeah,
are maybe adjacent or experts in their field. And the question isn't, is this going to work? It's just, does this person know their stuff?
yeah,
Like, can you like go out for a beer and like talk about physics and you're like, oh wow, this person can jam here? Like that's what we're looking for, not like because if it could have already been done, it would have been done. And luckily, we've also built a group of people around us. I use the word wily a lot. Like we've collected lots
hmm,
of wily people. And so they're not going in with like, well, you know, here's exactly why this thing isn't going to work, because that's not really what the diligence is for. That's what the
yeah,
money is for. Like
yeah.
oftentimes the way I think about our deep tech investing is this money well spent to find out the answers to these questions? And if the answer is yes, we, especially on our very early checks, like our 100K check, let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's, it should be the role of, a pioneering founder or financier to be like, if the answer to can this thing be built with $100,000 is no, like that's a useful thing for humanity. Like we're running the 1,000 trials of Edison like in 1,000 different ways with 1,000 different founders as a ecosystem, and that's a really powerful and important thing to keep moving forward. I wanted to ask about wily or cunning or crafty, or is there even a word for it in English? Like that was actually the number one trait of the Thiel Fellow, at least as written in the book. And it is also similar to YC's like relentlessly resourceful. But I think that just like that mix of refusal to quit and creativity and a little bit of irreverence for the status
Yep.
quo,
Yep.
like
Yep.
that is such a fun
Yeah.
collection
Yeah.
of traits.
Yep, absolutely. And we used to use the word quirky a lot. And
Mm,
lately, in the last maybe year, I've been using the word wily,
mm,
because wily gets at that like irreverence. Like quirky doesn't always get at that irreverent nature, but wily definitely does. The person who's going to buck the system, the one who's going to be self expressed, maybe in their area, but also other areas. And you're like, oh, wow, like this person has a lot to say. Yeah, we have found that to be a very, very interesting trait. Although it's a funny one, because I remember running, the first year of the Thiel Fellowship and was talking to an old colleague, Jimmy Keltrader, and we were running programs and getting people together, and I'm an East Coaster at heart. I say I'm East Coast on the inside and West Coast on the outside. And I grew up in the Boston area where, like, at least when I was growing up, being late was sacrilegious and like all this stuff. And it's taken me some time to culturally adjust to the West Coast. And sometimes I'd be like, oh, like people didn't show up on time today, and my colleague would be like, so wait, let me get this right. You selected for a bunch of people who are anti-status quo and want to do something different, but you're upset that they didn't show up at like 1 o'clock for this event. I'm like, okay, uh, wrong, but I wanted them not to be wily about our stuff. I wanted them to just be wily about other stuff. Um, so yeah, some of it has been an adjustment indeed, but we find those character traits endearing.
Yeah, well, it's there's some element of like living in a montage of a zoo of just like all these different things happening at the same time with these like highly creative, high agency people. You never really know what's going to happen next. That's just a wonderful picture. Yeah. So I want to sort of spend a minute towards the end here on 1517 and like the chapter that you're in now, coming out, everything, applying everything that you learn in the Thiel Fellowship to building what is now a fund and a community, but really in the same ethos, I think. But I think 1517 is like also a really interesting, powerful application of these ideas that is like still very early on a lot of people's radar.
Yeah, and I think we are in the early narrative arc of 1517, just like when we left 10 years ago, we were in the early narrative arc of the Thiel Fellowship. And I think
Yeah.
within the next 5 years, like, Josie's been very kind. I was on a panel with her and she said to the audience, 1517 is the most underrated venture capital firm that there has like ever been. And I was like, oh, like that's really sweet. And I think in another like 5 years, people are going to be like, whoa, where'd you guys come from? And I'll be like, we've
Yeah.
been here for 10 years now. But we very much packaged all the things we're talking about into our firm. We wanted to scale our work with the Thiel Foundation and the fellowship. And we thought the way to do that would be through using venture capital as a tool to back people. So then we could continuously back them over time and back way more of them. So at this point, we've invested over the last 10 years in 200 companies. Average company has, 2 to 3 founders. We also will back solo founders. So that's a lot of people that we're working with.
Mhm.
That doesn't include our grants that we give. We have a grant program where we'll give a young person, typically in high school, typically working on building something literally with their hands, sort of like getting on a lab bench, working in electronics, something like that. And we'll give them $1,000. We have 1,000 grantees at this point. Some of our portfolio companies have started as grantees with us. Ethan from Mock started as a grantee with us. We gave him a grant to start working on some ideas he had about rifles at his home in Texas. And that has spun out into what has become his defense tech company. We were the first investors into that company with a 100K check. And we're often that first investor in somebody before anybody else will take them seriously. We do angel and pre-seed work. And then we also have a thesis breaker. So we noticed over time that lots of very wily scientists were coming to us at 1517. And Michael and I were like, wow, this is really cool stuff, but doesn't fit our dropout narrative, like of being non-degreed and not, when people come to me and they're like, I dropped out of my PhD or I dropped out of Google. I'm like, that's not what we're talking about. Then something a little earlier. But this guy, Ben from Atom Computing, came to us 7 years ago. And he sat down and told us what he was doing with Atom Computing, quantum computing company. He leaves the meeting. Me and Michael turn to each other and we're like, wow, we're totally blown away by this guy. Hyper fluency up the wazoo. He starts talking. He asked us, what level of physics should I start at in this meeting? And we're like, I don't know, high school. About 2 minutes in, we're like, time out. Let's go to middle school. And then he starts talking again. And a minute later, we're like, and we literally said to him, talk to us like we are the dumbest golden Labradors you've ever met. That was the first time we ever used that phrase. And he did. He dumped it down for us. And we, and actually what was hilarious is after he left the room, me and Michael tried to explain it back to each other of like, what did we hear here? And then we realized this would make a hilarious like outtake podcast of us trying to explain back some like very deep technical idea. But we knew we had to write a check. And we said, okay, what would be a thesis break for us? What would make our dropouts proud? And it wouldn't be funding someone who has a PhD doing B2B SaaS. It would be someone who's working on sci-fi tech. And so that sci-fi tech bucket has become a mainstay of what we do at 1517, no matter if someone has a degree or not. But what we're seeing now, and what I'm so passionate about, is the coming together of those two thesis areas, younger and younger people working on sci-fi tech. And that's where I'm like, let's go, write the check. Like, okay, we're ready. Like, let's find out where they are on the crazy, crazy awesome spectrum by actually working with them and giving them resources, to see through their vision.
Yeah, which is so, I mean, I'm glad to see that because it's also, in my view, the greatest moral good that venture can do is
Yeah.
like push those sci-fi boundaries and drag the impossible into the possible. Like that is
Yes.
just so
Yes.
fun.
Oh, I love that. I've been using the phrase something impossible to the possible, but I like to drag the impossible into the
Yeah.
possible. That's
That
great.
is, I just wrote the welcome to my book of collecting all Elon's most useful ideas. So that was like, I feel like his most core skill is dragging the impossible into the possible.
Wow, that's great. Love
and I think
that.
that's like, the hope for that book is that it creates 1 million Musks in the next generation. So like,
Wow.
how can we pull out
my
the best parts of him and incept,
Wow.
thousands or millions of
When's this
kids
book
to learn.
coming out?
Q1. I'll send you a
All
copy.
right, cool. I'm excited. I want our community to read it when we have events, have it at events. I'm like, this sounds great.
Yeah, I feel like this is why I have so much fun with these conversations, because I feel like the
Yeah.
ethos is like identical, just served in different ways, and it's just very, very
Yeah.
fun to find like allies in the cause, because nobody's doing this for any reason other than to like grow the pie and push the frontier.
Yeah.
And when you see
And that's
somebody
been
who's also
amazing.
doing that, you're like, oh my god, how can I help?
No, absolutely. And when we were starting doing sci-fi investing 7 years ago, like no one was writing these early stage checks. And so it's really cool. Just like seeing, hey, there's fellowships now. It's like now there's more people writing sci-fi checks and there's an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is what like makes a leverage of support for people to do what they're doing. And yeah, similarly, it gets me very, very excited.
Yeah. All right. So as we like wrap up here, what is your like call to adventure for people? What is You've got this incredible community around 1517. There's probably a wide variety of people listening to it. Some will have like kids that maybe the Thiel Fellowship is relevant to. Some will be potential founders for 1517. Like what are the on ramps into your world?
Oh gosh. Yeah. On ramps are super straightforward. I love when people email me and I love a good cold email. I even have a pinned tweet that's like, here's how you cold email me. This is what I want to hear from you. I want to hear about you. Send me pictures of your stuff, like, and your cats and whatever you've got. And those emails really stand out. So Danielle at 1517fun.com. You can follow me on Twitter, D Strachman. We have our website, 1517fun.com. People have been telling us we have some broken links on there. We've been too busy working with our founders, but we're going to have a new website coming out probably sometime in 2026. So, all is not for naught. But those are some places to find us. We've done lots of writing on Substack and Medium, and ideally the new website actually will like tie all of this together. So people are like, I know where to find you now. But those are some ideas.
And in-person events mostly in the Bay?
I mean, I'd say there's like a stronger fraction of them here, but we also
Hmm,
do dinners when we travel. We're going to Singapore next week. We do ice cream
cool.
socials wherever we go, and we're going to do an ice cream social in Singapore. And these types of events, we just love to meet people and have them come. So yeah, just reach out.
Yeah, and if you're on a campus, keep your eye out, because I feel like the thing that you guys do best that most people don't bother to do is like go to the campuses, go to the events, go to the hackathons, and like meet the people there. Like it's you're like scouting for a pro sports team.
Yeah, yes. And we describe it like a sporting analogy a lot. And we want to meet people when they're makers before they're even thinking about founding something. So it's not about interacting with us when you're like, oh, I need a check or I'm ready to build my first startup. We just want to talk to wily weirdos who want to be around other wily weirdos. And then we'll see what happens in the future.
Yeah, and there's nothing that a wily weirdo loves more than a community of wily weirdos to hang out with. Like, those pockets are rare and prized, and even, just the service that you provide by being a shelling point for everybody to organize around and just like hang out around your lighthouse is an incredible thing for the community.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we love what we do.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for doing what you do.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. This has been
Yeah.
extremely fun.
Oh, this has been super fun. Thanks for having me today.